Just a heads up, I tried to keep this video fairly vague and spoiler free, but as we go on I do start talking about spoilers, but I will mark those out. All the same, if you're looking to get into Bleach completely fresh, I would highly recommend not listening to any kind of critical take on it, as good as it may be. I can pinpoint the beginning of my history with Bleach to a single pivotal moment, which certainly didn't feel all that pivotal at the time. But it was science class back in, it must have been 2008 or 2009. And I noticed my friend was drawing all of these weird kinds of swords in his book, instead of obviously listening to the teacher because science is boring, don't at me. And he was drawing Zangetsu, and he was drawing Zabimaru, and he was drawing, I think he liked whatever the hell Kira's sword is called, and I remember looking at them and being like, wow, those are really cool drawings. And he's like, oh yeah, they're not my designs, they're from this anime called Bleach. And I said, anime? What's that? Some kind of cartoon? So in an unusually educational version of our science lesson, I learned all about what anime is, and about Bleach, and the fact that he goes to an anime club, like an after school thing, and I never went, but apparently he said he can't believe the teacher would let them watch Bleach because it was very violent, and I went, very violent? Tell me more. Of course this was, like 13, 14 years ago now, this is all paraphrasing, I don't remember the scenes word for word, but it went something like that. So yeah, he introduced me to Bleach, and this was pre-Crunchyroll, so it was slightly scuffed Bleach, I'll leave it at that. And I still remember watching it for the first time. It was unlike anything I had seen before, and honestly, for the first few episodes, I wasn't sure I was going to stick with it. If like a few things had been done differently in episode 1, I might never have watched anime. The first episode hooked me just enough to get over my doubts when it came to the second episode, because the second episode focused on Ichigo's school life and meeting his friends and meeting characters like Orihime and Tatsuki, and you know, like really over the top. I mean, it's normal for anime, but like I noticed the really like hyperbolic emotional kind of actions and language and all of the fan service, and I felt weird. I was like, this is so odd. It's, at the time it almost felt like I was watching a kids show, but it was too adult to be a kids show. It was a weird blend, and I was sat there during the scene where we meet Orihime for the first time thinking, do I want to watch the show? Is this really the kind of thing I want to watch? But luckily I persevered. When I met my friend in school the next day, I had seen, I think it was around 15 episodes in one go. I nearly watched the entire Substitute Shinigami arc in one sitting. That should tell you just how much I was hooked on this show when it got its claws in me. You'll have to remember I grew up reading Darren Shan novels, so, you know, vampires and demons and werewolves and things that go bump in the night. A teenage Soul Reaper fighting demonic hollows with an oversized sword in order to protect those he loved was so fucking up my alley. You couldn't have made it up, honestly. I was so obsessed with the story, I was so invested in that world, but I predicted the major first plot twist of the second arc without even having foreknowledge of how anime and shonen works. I didn't even know the tropes of this genre, but I got it, not in one. I made the predictable prediction first, and then all I had to go on was, no, it's not who you would think it is, so I went with the least likely person possible. My friend was like, how did you do that? Which in hindsight I guess isn't as impressive as it felt back then, but back then it felt pretty impressive. Watching Ichigo's powers evolve over the course of the anime was so fucking cool. Like, you never knew, well, I guess you kind of could predict what was going to happen next, but like the reveals as to what his new form was always something that was very cool. And then they always teased you with something a little bit further, like, but what could this mean? Oh, he's not even at his full power yet, which again is extremely shonen, but this was my first shonen anime, and this was such a good first shonen anime, because again, looking at it now, there's so much about it which is kind of stereotypical for shonen anime. You know, the protagonist with hidden powers, who doesn't even know his full potential but is scarily powerful by the end of his, you know, story. It's not something that's new. It's Dragon Ball Z to a T, and I've never even seen that show, but I know what happens, or I know the kind of thing that happens. But you can't help but enjoy watching them just climb the power rankings to the point where they're absurdly powerful by the end of it. The hype for Ichigo's Bankai was off the charts. I remember, like, I mean, I was watching it years after that arc came out, but like, because of the way the anime is paced, they pretty much got up, if I remember, they got up to the Byakuya fight, and then they were like, now let's go, you know, do all these different fights for the next 15 episodes, which is pretty, you know, Bleach is pretty guilty of doing that. But even then, learning about all of these other characters and their swords and their abilities and what they can do, and like the subtle things they can do to fight slightly better, or the less subtle things like releasing their sword, or like showing off an entirely new move. It was all brand new to me at the time, and I'd never seen character design on this level of what if these characters had these crazy magical powers that really defined them, and you know, the way they fought. Not to mention the fight scenes. Oh my god, I can't, where do I begin with the fight scenes? I've been rewatching a bunch of them over the last week or so, and I will say, while they have aged really well, they have aged, and there's better animated fight scenes out there in 2021 for sure. But for me at the time, it left such an impression on me that whenever, okay, how do I talk about this? Growing up through my teenage years, and sometimes even now, whenever I face emotional turmoil, I would visualize it in my head as kind of a shonen anime sword fight. That's how much of an impression Bleach left on me, because the fights in Bleach, and again, most shonen anime, are all about kind of like these two different opposing viewpoints clashing, and like, it's usually comes down to willpower, right? That's the whole idea behind shonen anime sometimes. Like, sure, there's tactical advantages and whether some powers are better against others, but especially in Bleach, it's who wants to win more, who needs to win more. Byakuya, who honestly believes that if they broke the law to save even his own sister, then they would be inviting chaos into the world, versus Ichigo, who knew that that was a load of fucking bullshit, and that you shouldn't kill Rukia for something as innocent as helping someone protect his own family by passing on her powers, you know? And the thing about anime is they constantly talk while they fight. Like, it's not just a physical fight, it's a verbal fight too. And the combination of these things informing each other is what makes fights so fun to watch. It's not just about the raw action that's on the screen, even though that's really good. It's the weight behind the swings of the sword, you know? It's very easy to make fun of shonen anime with clips like, I can't lose here, and then like immediately one-shotting the much more powerful enemy, and Bleach is very much guilty of that, especially in the later arcs. But it's when you're actually like, what's the word, immersed in that world, and you're watching the arc episode by episode instead of just the fight out of context, it fucking slaps. Now, in order to talk about the entirety of Bleach and what it means to me, we do need to talk about the declining quality of the story later on, which is a shame. But I do think that there is merit to it. I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, but I can see where a lot of the criticisms come from, and I do agree with a lot of them. You will come across some Bleach fans who will tell you that it is a 1 or 2 season anime to them, like the end of a Soul Society arc. I don't remember how long it lasts in the anime at the minute, but the end of a Soul Society arc is where it all starts to go wrong, and I will admit that the Soul Society arc is like really tight storytelling. It's probably the peak of Bleach, but I would also argue that even Bleach in its less perfect form in future arcs is still better than a lot of anime out there. Although, to be fair, I haven't actually watched a huge amount of different anime even now, all these years later, although there are some very important ones I'll be doing similar videos like this about. Firstly, we need to talk about filler arcs, because a lot of people, well, I don't know that, but I worry that people don't realise what a filler arc is when they're watching Bleach, because this is going to be a lot of other people's first anime too. I didn't know that the Bound arc was a filler arc when I was watching it. I didn't know what filler arcs were, so I just assumed that this was the show continuing as normal. And it kind of I started to notice that there wasn't a lot of character development, and that because of that it kind of felt flat. And when it comes down to it, that is my main issue with filler arcs. You're not going to get any character development in it. No new usage of power, or anything interesting like that. Or if there is anything interesting like that, it's either taken from the manga and placed earlier on in the show, which I can't necessarily point to an instance of that happening. I'm just saying that to cover all my bases. or it's something that is a temporary power that is never used again. Again, that's pretty broad for most shonen anime, but that's definitely the case in Bleach. And again, to be fair, filler arcs, they might just be excuses to have really good sword fights, and there are good filler arcs out there. The Bound filler arc wasn't bad, and there's also a filler arc where the Shinigami have to fight their Zanpakuto spirits because a guy called Muramasa is turning them against him. In fact, I'd go as far as to say the majority of filler arcs in Bleach are pretty good, and they are just excuses for really cool sword fights. That being said, I would still recommend skipping them, unless you have time to watch how many fucking episodes there are in this anime. What is it, like 300, 400, 600? I don't even know anymore. The next real arc of Bleach, and it's kind of hard to lump it in as a single arc. Some people split it up to the Arrancar arc and then the Huikomundo arc, but it basically explores Bleach tackling the idea of taming your inner demon, and I thought it was really fucking cool. It revealed a series of villains which were more true to the core nature of a show. We're going back to Hollows, but what if Hollows were as powerful and as cool to fight as the Shinigami of the previous arc, right? I think the anime did start, I mean, not just the anime, but the entire story did start to have issues around here. The pacing was all over the place. Sometimes it would, I mean, at least the anime, I don't think I read the manga version of this arc, actually. But in the anime, for sure, there are so many fights of, like, Vice Captain versus Arrancar number 18 or something, and it goes on for like 3 or 4 episodes, and it's like, okay, I don't really care. Looking back on it, if I haven't read the manga, there's a good chance that some of those fights will be filler, so maybe the manga is paced better in that respect, but knowing the final arc of the manga, maybe not. I mean, as interesting as all of these character designs are for the other character designs and their fighting styles and their weapons and matching up against the enemy, there's a reason why when you look up top 10 best fights in Bleach, it's always Ichigo versus, you know? Not just that, but the Huikomundo arc specifically, if we are splitting that into 2, deals with a very similar motivation for Ichigo that the Soul Society arc does. He's trying to rescue someone who he cares about, who has been kidnapped, who happens to be female too, which is a little gender normative, but there you go. Bleach has a big damsel in distress problem, I'll say that much. Although I will also say that that is something I think Kubo worked to try and walk back a little bit in the final arc. I really like how the very final fight plays out, but I'm not going to talk about that because spoilers. If you can tell, I'm trying to be as general as I can about this in case someone who's watching this hasn't seen Bleach and is watching this to kind of learn about Bleach, but at the same time I'm trying not to hold back on what I want to talk about, so hopefully I'm striking that balance. But yeah, I was rewatching the Ichigo versus Grimmjow fight, because, I mean, it's not a spoiler, they fight. And the issue is, I noticed that in previous fights, when Ichigo was on the ropes, he had a power-up in his back pocket that he would throw out there, or maybe he wouldn't throw it out there because he wouldn't necessarily be in control of it, but there was always a plausible reason for him to come out of that fight on top. But in the Ichigo versus Grimmjow fight, and I guess I am going to spoil this moment, Orihime literally asks him not to die, and Ichigo, who is very much on the back foot and is losing the fight at that moment, stops, catches Grimmjow's claw in his bare hand, and says, "Sorry, Grimmjow, I've decided not to die," and proceeds to fucking annihilate him. And that is a big red flag in my personal opinion, and I don't think the show was ever that bad again. But yeah, that particular fight was very guilty for motivation no jutsu. But I don't remember it bothering me back in the day. It just bothers me now, so who knows. I guess maybe it's because I've outgrown some stuff with Bleach, I don't know, hopefully not. And it's not too grave a sin, because if you go and watch that fight, the animation is top fucking notch. Worst case scenario, if Bleach is just a very loose plot, which is an excuse to get a bunch of people to do big dumb anime sword fights, then at least it does the big dumb anime sword fights really fucking well. Ichigo vs Ulquiorra is one of my favourite moments in the entire show, and was so good that they animated it twice. At the beginning of the Hellverse movie, they did it a second time with movie level quality. I won't give away what happens, but my god, I love it. And it also marks another kind of drop off point of some people who are like, okay, I saw what I wanted to see, the show has jumped the shark at this point with that particular plot point. And they all say that they didn't really bother with Ichigo versus the final boss of that arc. When we got to Ichigo vs Ulquiorra, I believe I caught up with the anime around the time just before that fight happened, like literally just before it happened. I think just as it was starting, I caught up to it, so I was so invested in the story that I decided to go out of my way to read the manga. To bleach the manga? No, don't do that, you won't be able to read the pages. So it's important to note, I think, that from this point onwards, every episode of the anime I watch is kind of an adaptation to me. It's no longer a fresh story, it's I know the story, and I'm excited to see how they animate this. And boy did I choose a time to read the manga. Because of the Ichigo versus Ulquiorra fight and the way that goes, when I read the manga, it just immediately felt like the manga ramped up the stakes, and I was like, whoa, is this what the manga's always been like? And then the anime did it too. I was like, no, I guess I just started reading the manga at a very interesting point. There are now very big spoilers coming up that I can't avoid, so if you haven't seen the show, please, thank you for listening, and I'll see you another time, I guess. When it comes to Ichigo versus Aizen, I unapologetically love that fight. I love how Ichigo powers up. I love that he takes a different route to the route he takes with Ichigo versus Ulquiorra. I love the way it turns out. I love the way it ends. It's great. If I had to criticize it, I would criticize it by saying that the power that Aizen attains is just straight up raw power, which is kind of oppositional to him as a character before that point, because of his entire power is trickery and illusion. But come on, the fucking design of final Getsuga Tensho version Ichigo, like, and the way the sad look in his eyes, that is something I have come to appreciate more on the rewatching of the main fights, which I did this week. Grimmjow constantly goes on about how he hates the look in Ichigo's eyes during their fight, and he's talking about how sad Ichigo looks, because obviously Grimmjow's whole thing is, you came here to fight me, you only care about fighting, you don't care about me, like, this doesn't matter, you don't care about Orihime, you only care about fighting, don't pretend to be sad. But Ichigo's whole thing is, I can feel the emotions of, yeah, it's a whole thing. But I would say whereas Soul Society arc Ichigo is a lot more kind of motivated to save Rukia in ways of like, how dare they do this, I'm going to stop them and I'm going to get more powerful. By the time we get to Ichigo versus Grimmjow, he's seen some shit, and he's a little bit less enthusiastic isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. Victory doesn't always taste sweet, and especially after him fighting Ulquiorra, the look on his face when he's taking on Aizen is I don't even know how to explain it. It's not like sadness, it's kind of just exasperation. It's like, come on, let's get this over with, like, stop it. And I've already talked about Final Getsuga Tensho version of Ichigo, but before that, Daigon form Ichigo, where he's got the long hair and the sword wrapped around his arm, and he's just way more powerful than he was before, even before he starts his final technique. I think that might be one of my favourite forms of Ichigo. And the soundtrack, oh my god, I have not even talked about the soundtrack. If I've done this video right, you'll have heard the soundtrack in the background this entire time. Shiro Sagasu is so good at making the Bleach soundtrack, and I sincerely hope he comes back for the new round of Bleach that they're animating. I love how when we're dealing with Hollow Ichigo, it's operatic, and when we're dealing with Daigon Ichigo, it's like heavy metal guitar. It's like different, it feels different, it feels powerful in different ways. But anyway, yes, Ichigo defeats Aizen, spoilers, and then we deal with a loss of power arc, which at the time I really didn't like very much at all, and I just in general I don't like, oh no, what if a protagonist lost their powers? I've never liked that kind of arc. But looking back on it, I've seen a lot of people in YouTube comments lately say that the Fullbring arc is underrated, and thinking about it, yeah, I think it is underrated. It's post-time skip, and we love a time skip. We get some character development of some of the main cast, which has been lacking outside of fights for far too long, and we get to see Ichigo being severely fucked with, which is always fun to see. And the retribution, the fight against Ginjo, it's so good. That wasn't Getsuga Tensho. That was just displaced air from the swing of my sword. The fucking look on Ginjo's face, like, whoa. Plus, Ichigo's new Shikai design after getting his powers back is really good. It's really good. But anyway, that's where the anime ends. So if you've seen the anime and not read the manga, I'm going to tell you to drop off here, because I'm going to be talking about the final manga arc and spoilers, and that is what they're animating soon, either this year or next year. And I'm really excited to see how they animate it. But yes, the final arc, the 1000-Year Blood War arc, I had a lot of issues with it. Firstly, the pacing was all over the fucking place, and that's something I think a lot of fans agree with a lot. Basically, from what I read and seen around, the publishers told Kubo that for whatever reason it was time to wrap up Bleach, so he said, okay, don't worry, I'll start doing the final arc now. But then he kind of said slightly to his audience, don't worry, the final arc is going to last for years. And his publishers said, no. So this results in an arc which focuses a lot on fights of side characters, as at least the show did, which I never liked to begin with. The fights of side characters versus villains, side villains even, the not so powerful villains. And then all of a sudden the story hits overdrive mode, and suddenly we're getting quick, we need to power up Ichigo and tell all of his backstory and then throw him against the final villain and end the story. Like, there are payoffs, or I guess there are setups that are never paid off, and it is incredibly blatant. The most blatant one I can think of is they bring back Grimmjow as a pseudo ally to help fight the Quincy's, right? And then you never see him again, as far as I remember. And that's an important thing to note too. It has been a long time since I read the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and I no longer have access to it, so there's a lot of stuff I've forgotten. There are some really cool videos on YouTube of people who have taken the manga, who have coloured it, and then who have added soundtrack to it, and then have added kind of After Effects to it to kind of pan around panels and make it look good for the video format. And those videos are really fucking good. And I watched a few of those videos, and it was mostly based on the fights. And there is stuff that I straight up forgot happened. Like Toshiro's Bankai, like the final form of his Bankai, turning him into an adult. I completely forgot about that. If I'm being honest, I think the most exciting thing about this final arc being animated is just how much of it I have forgotten about and how much I'm going to rediscover. Plus, I read this in a comment section once, but apparently the studio have come out and said that they're going to try and address the rushed nature of the final arc and flesh things out a little bit more, which would be divine and amazing, and I really hope they come through on this. Like, there are going to be people who will be like, no, it has to follow the manga 100%. No, as long as it doesn't add anything that doesn't need to be there, if it just kind of like fulfills promises that were left unfulfilled, I guess, that would be my dream. Like, show us the Grimmjow fight. Like, he went off and fought someone, right? Show us that. Again, it's been so long, I don't really remember what happened. Maybe we did see the fight, but I remember something about Grimmjow being unresolved. He just kind of pissed off. My other major issue with the 1000-Year Blood War arc is that Bleach has always been slightly notorious for being like, oh, you know, this really powerful character, they just got one shot. That's how strong the enemy is. 1000-Year Blood War arc is like that times 10. It happens so often and to so many characters, and I see what Kubo was going for. He was going for like, this is the final arc, so I'm gonna start killing off like major characters because it's like a big oh shit, like they died. This is a character I've known for years, and I can do like lots of emotional weight behind that kind of thing. But a lot of it just came off as like, haha, they're dead now. Isn't that crazy? How's Ichigo gonna overcome this fight? And one final thing, and this is seriously getting into some huge spoiler territory, but I guess if you're still here you don't care. It's revealed that Ichigo is also part Quincy, which, if you're following along, makes him part human, part Shinigami, part Hollow, part Quincy, and I think part Fullbringer as well. I think he's still got Fullbringer powers. That was kind of left vague. So Ichigo is basically the ultra genetic hybrid MacGuffin Boogaloo. And to be fair, when he gains mastery over all of these powers and kind of fuses them together into his fighting style, the form he takes on is really cool. It's like this kind of like bastard demigod looking form of like this mishmash of different aesthetics, and it is really cool. It's not my favorite form of Ichigo, but it is really cool for what it is. I think Kubo's art once again pays off there. Like, you've got the hollow mask and the kind of dark hollow eye, but only on like one side of his face, and he's still in control, but it's like the Vasto Lord hollow form kind of thing. And then you've got like his Shinigami sword, but it's turned white because he's used Blood Ven on it, which is a Quincy power, and it's just all so good. But again, too much of the final arc seemed like pointless one-shots and MacGuffinry, and I mean, there was some really cool stuff in there, like learning about some final secrets of characters, like oh my fucking god, I'm blanking on him, Urahara's Bankai, that's the one, and Yorichi's Bankai, and stuff like that. I liked that we got to learn more about the Soul King, although I've probably forgotten most of that. I like that we got to see the Royal Guard, who are like a class above Captain Class, because of course they are. I think if the anime can iron out some of the pacing issues, I won't be so averse to a lot of like the one-shots which happen. And I think it'll be really cool. Like, Bleach is returning, man. I'm so fucking excited. I'm so excited I've downloaded the Bleach mobile game, because when I first heard about Bleach Brave Souls, I didn't care. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Manga's over, they're doing a mobile game. It's over, pack it in, boys, we're done. But 6 years later, I my fixation on Bleach is returning, and I'm like, wasn't there a mobile game or something? And I looked it up, and apparently it's good, and it's on Steam now. So I downloaded it, I've been playing through it, and it is not the best way to experience the story for the first time. It's absolutely not. But it's a really good way to re-experience the story for someone who's already, experienced it. And I'm hoping, because I can't find a definitive answer on this, I'm hoping they have the Thousand Year Blood War arc in that game. But all I've done is the Substitute Soul Reaper arc so far, so yeah, I'm definitely going to be playing more of that game. It's a gacha game. I don't intend on spending any money on it, but the gameplay's fun enough. It's fairly simple, and the way it tells the story is quite simple too. But it's just nice. If you're a major Bleach fan, it's just nice to re-immerse yourself in that world. Plus, that game has some really cool headcanon stuff. What if Ichigo's Quincy powers manifested in a more of a traditional way, and they have a form of him looking super powerful but with a bow. And I think 5 or 10 years ago I would have poo-pooed that and said, well, that's dumb, that's non-canon, that's annoying. But I am a lot less anal about that kind of thing now, and I just fucking love the design, and I think it's really cool, and I hope that game continues to prosper, and I'm going to play it. So yeah, hopefully over the course of the last 25 minutes you've got some sense as to what Bleach means to me personally, and if you feel a similar way, feel free to let me know in the comments what Bleach means to you personally, or if you have any differing opinions to me, or if you have any agreements with me. I guess maybe I'm being too harsh on stuff about pacing and plot foo and all that kind of thing. Maybe I'm being too generous about the anime post Soul Society arc. I don't know, man. What do you think? Either way, if you're here, you've clearly sat through my ramble, and I thank you greatly. This is a new style of video I'm going to try and do on a non-regular basis. Just if I find myself fixating on something that I love, while I'm in that mode, I want to record a video about why I love that thing. For instance, I'm going to do one on Doctor Who, but it wouldn't make sense to do it on Doctor Who now, because I don't think about Doctor Who at the minute. It's not something that's in my brain. But next time I'm thinking about Doctor Who, I'm going to be obsessed with it, so I'm going to do a video on it then. But that's quite enough talking. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next video.